Wallace continued the air tests. He was having problems. The prototypes wouldn't bounce on a reliable path. With the deadline looming, the strain was showing.
Anxiety, am I doing the right thing? Being in charge of something is the very devil. If you are answerable for the whole thing, then God help you.
On the 13th of April 1943, on a test at Reculver Beach near Herne Bay in Kent, Wallace was dismayed to see the wooden shell break apart, although he noticed that the cylindrical bomb casing continued to bounce.
Wallace decided, well, wait a minute, because one or two of these have actually bounced on, let's take the outside off and let us go with the cylinder alone. And that's another critical decision. Roughly 1 month before the operation takes place, they decide on the nature of the weapon.
4 weeks later, Wallace tested a live bomb for the first time. It bounced precisely on target for 800 yards. Wallace's design at last was working. The bouncing bomb was codenamed Upkeep. More accurately described as a depth charge, it was a cylinder 5 feet long and 4 feet in diameter. Inside was 6,600 pounds of Torpex, an underwater explosive introduced in 1942 for torpedoes. Wrapped in a steel casing, its total weight was almost 5 tons.
The ingenious solution is he spins it up in anti-clockwise fashion at 500 revolutions a minute, so that this bomb will skip precisely off the surface but not have a tendency, if it was spun forward, to skip over the face of the dam.
The trick would be to release it when the aeroplane was 450 feet from the dam at a ground speed of 235 miles per hour and an altitude of 60 feet.
Once it came to the proximity of the target itself, that backspin actually helped the bomb crawl down the wall of the target and then detonate at just the right depth.
Success depends on a series of difficult actions perfectly executed. Hitting a target with this kind of precision requires not just clever engineering, but also incredible flying.
In March 1943, the newly formed 617 Squadron began training at Scampton Royal Air Force Base.
Those young men, all in their 20s, some in their late teens, had flown many missions already against the Germans. Many of them had already survived 2 combat tours. There were Englishmen, there were Brits, Australians, Canadians, New Zealanders were in this.
Leading them was Wing Commander Guy Gibson. Only 24 years old, Gibson was a veteran of an unprecedented 170 missions. At a time when only 1 in 6 men returned from their first tour of 30 operations, Gibson was a legend. His job now was to prepare the crews for a raid just weeks away.
This is a man that did not have the luxury of time. The bag of worms that Wing Commander Gibson was given to form a squadron in less than 2 months from nothing, no aircraft, I mean, he didn't even have paper clips.
The squadron would have to quickly master night flying at the perilously low altitude of just 60 feet.
They only had 7 weeks to train for this raid. 7 weeks to train for something that no one had ever done before.
The crews will be flying the Lancaster, the RAF's brand new 4-engine bomber. The Lancaster has a 102-foot wingspan, so flying at only 60 feet up, if you dip a wing, it could be fatal.
Gauging altitude was a key problem the crews had to overcome.
The difficulty, and especially in an area like the Ruhr where you have industrial haze, is that you will get slightly hazy conditions forming over the water, which means that it's very difficult to tell where the haze ends and the water begins.
To solve this, the men fixed 2 spotlights to the bottom of each Lancaster. The lights were angled to converge when it was flying at exactly 60 feet. Crews worked together to watch the spotlights and direct the pilot higher or lower until they met.
Every bomber crew was a very closely knit team. They were very, very conscious that all their lives depended on each other.
All clear, lads? Clear. Good. Good work.
May 14th, 1943, a coded message comes through to begin what is now called Operation Chastise. Barnes-Wallis has worked for 3 years, and the flight crews have dropped over 2,000 practice bombs in preparation for this moment.
Men.
On the 16th of May, 1943, Wallis and Guy Gibson briefed the crews.
As previously done. We're going to hit the major dams of Germany, including the Mona Dam. Here to explain the ops in a little more detail to you, Mr. Wallis.
Thank you, sir. Gentlemen,
The first time the majority of the squadron ever met Barnes-Wallis was at the briefing. Everybody was sort of wondering, who is this man up there with this big shock of white hair and not in uniform, and what's he doing here to brief?
I can see by the expressions on some of your faces you think this is a far-fetched idea. I assure you it's not. Please allow me to explain.
They're facing the industrial heartland targets deep in the heart of very heavily defended German airspace, where you have internetted fighters, anti-aircraft artillery, radar, and communications, what we would call today an integrated air defense network. A very, very tough nut to crack.
I know it will work, gentlemen, and I know you are the lads to do it.
Cheers.
Mr. Wallis, see you in a couple of hours, sir.
I'll buy the first round in the pub.
First of many, sir.
Good hunting, Commander. Don't let anything happen to you or your boys.
If anything does, it won't be your fault.
In the final hours, Wallis considered the human cost that came with his invention and feared that for some of the men, this mission would be their last. On the 16th of May, 1943, 19 bomber crews were about to embark on one of the riskiest raids of the Second World War. Barnes-Wallis had struggled to bring a new weapon to life. Now it was in the hands of 133 brave young men. The moment of the daring assault on the Nazi war machine and Germany's giant dams had arrived. Wallis's bouncing bomb was about to be put to the test. At 9 p.m., the airmen made their way to their aircraft.
I don't believe my father ever really talked about that he was going to die or thought he was going to die, but I think they all believed that they probably that night may not make it home.
From this point on, Barnes-Wallis can only wait and watch as he passes responsibility to the crews. The operation presents unparalleled hazards for the airmen because they'll be flying at a dangerously low altitude within sight and range of Nazi guns. One mistake can mean disaster.
In airplane number 2 was 21-year-old Flight Sergeant John Fraser of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Married just 18 days earlier, he joined his pilot John Hopgood as a bomb aimer. Navigator was fellow Canadian Ken Earnshaw, who disclosed to Fraser his dark feelings of foreboding.
What do you think about tonight?
I think we're going to lose a few. I think we're going to be one of them.
The navigator's premonition is something that John Fraser's daughter will never forget.
It was quite profound because he knew him, and I think the fact that Ken was saying that was a real reality check for both of them, and I'm sure they were both very frightened.
At 9:39 p.m. they took off, with one of the huge bouncing bombs called Upkeep hanging from the plane's belly.
Okay, flight. Rear gunner. Prepare for takeoff.
Here we go again, boys.
Their destination was the Mona Dam.
You think about this thing at night, low level, night, penetration, no lights, over land. Then you make your approach over water. And these people really had their lives in the hands of the young men that were sitting in those pilot seats on that flight.
The 19 bombers would target 6 dams. The first wave of 9 planes would start at the Mona, then go on to attack the Ada Dam. The next 5 planes would target the massive Sorpa Dam. The remaining 5 would stand by as a reserve. If all went well, there were 3 additional dams on the target list. Wing Commander Gibson led a formation of 3 aircraft, flying at less than 100 feet of altitude as they crossed the North Sea.